I have always loved dogs. I love dogs. And ever since I was young, I have consistently pestered my parents to get a dog. Unfortunately, they have always had a response that was not favorable to this desire. However, this did not stop me from my interest in the origins of canines. Hello, my name is Tobin Fayle, and welcome to my Masterworks presentation of wolves in North America. My deep interest in wolves started this past summer when I had the opportunity to visit a demonized wolf sanctuary in Golden, BC. The guides at the wolf sanctuary passionately informed and educated visitors on the importance of wolves in our world, and I realized how strong my interest in wolves was and the impact that they had on us. The outcome of the experience sparked a deep interest and desire to learn more, which influenced my decision to study wolves as the topic of my Masterworks project. I wanted to know more about the wolf call and everything I could learn about them as a keystone species. What is their habitat? Why is there a wolf call? What are the histories and perceptions of the human-wolf relationship? My project allowed me to meet interesting people who are passionate about wolves, giving me deeper insight into this amazing species and the importance and benefits that they play to both humans and the natural world. Today I'll be discussing how important wolves are, the history of the human-wolf relationship, and the wolf call. I plan to explain to you why the wolf call is too excessive and why I think that should be eliminated or cut down a lot. Wolves are found all throughout Canada, but with different variations depending on their different region. They're split up into three regions: the Canadian Arctic, Western Canada, and Eastern Canada. In the Canadian Arctic, you can find the Arctic wolf. In Western Canada, you can find the Rocky Mountain wolf, and wolves in Eastern Canada are generally known as timber wolves. It's important to note that these are all just gray wolves, but with different names in the different regions. And this is just in Canada. Wolves live in Asia, Europe, and North America. At one point, they lived all over the Northern Hemisphere, but today the range is much smaller due to habitat loss and hunting. My presentation is going to be focusing on the wolves in Canada and North America. Wolves are very diverse and can live in many different habitats, which is why their populations are spread out over the expansive regions of Canada and North America. For example, a gray wolf can live in the forest, tundra, plains, and mountains, demonstrating their adaptability to varying ecosystems. As a bare minimum, wolves require food and water in order to exist in the ecosystem. Wolves most commonly live in packs, although sometimes they do live by themselves. But this only happens when a wolf leaves their first pack to find or create another pack. Wolves are known as the Keystone Species. The concept of the Keystone Species was first developed in 1969 by zoologist Robert Payne after observing the relationship between marine invertebrate and the intertidal zone. His experiments and observations on starfish species led him to the discovery of the impact of what happens when the starfish was removed from the intertidal zone. The removal of that starfish increased mussel population, which had an effect on all the other organisms in the environment. Thus, the starfish was vital to the ecosystem. This discovery and observation led him to the concept that the starfish was a keystone species, and that without it, the rest of the organisms in the ecosystem would be affected. These organisms are vital to the existence of many other species of animal and plant life in their shared environments. In fact, keystone species define an entire ecosystem. Without them, the ecosystem becomes unbalanced. Keystone species play a large role in the maintaining of the balance of their ecosystem. Their existence or lack thereof can cause great fluctuations that have either positive or negative impacts. And as you can see in the picture, if there is no wolf, then the deer and elk will eat most of the plants on the bottom, which would mean that the other animals would be forced out due to lack of food. An important example of a time in history when a keystone species was removed from an ecosystem was when the wolves were called in Yellowstone Park between 1926 and 1995. This resulted in disastrous consequences. There were no wolves left over, and the deer, elk, and bison populations took over due to the lack of predators. These animals ate all of the grass, causing lack of food for the other less dominant herbivores. After this, there was a domino effect, and many herbivores were consequently forced out of this ecosystem. With many of the herbivores gone, the carnivores also left too, resulting in the main herbivore populations to explode. All these animals ate the small bushes and grasses, which had a huge effect on the herbivores and the health of the plants. The loss of the wolves also affected the health of the streams and rivers. With overgrazing of the plants, the rivers became unshaded and warmer, and the riverbanks were eroded. This affected everything from fish to beavers. Once the wolves returned in 1995, they were able to hunt the large herbivore populations. With less of the herbivores presented, these ecosystems were able to grow more grass, flowers, and trees again. The increase in the plant availability caused organically about wolves and will express their appreciation for their hunting abilities. If they did not, it was believed that the wolves would become offended or have other animals bring bad luck on them. Most tribes tried to take precautions to avoid offending the wolves. Native American tribes did not think of wolves as having higher importance than any other animal. Rather, they would hunt and trap the wolves just like any other animal, but after the hunting and trapping, they would end with rituals of giving thanks and apologies to the wolf spirits. Our modern relationships with wolves have improved in many areas, though this does depend on where you are and where your interests lie. For instance, in Vancouver, we may be saying save the wolves because they do not have an impact on our location, so our relationship with them is positive. If we are farmers with cattle and the wolves are killing them, we may be saying remove the wolves. Overall, there has been an increase in humans having a more favorable view of wolves because their understanding for wolves has grown through time, and we now know how beneficial they are to our land and ecosystems. Christianity caused changes in how people in Western Europe perceived wolves. It began when the humans shifted from thinking of themselves as part of the natural world to the masters of the natural world. The Bible does not judge animals as good or bad since God declared that all animals are good from the start. The wolf is mentioned in the Old and New Testament only as a symbol of rapacity, wantonness, cunning, and deceit, in reference to the human characteristics. Due to this, the wolf was viewed as evil and symbolized a threat to the Roman Catholic Church. Science and natural history literature before the mid-20th century typically portrayed wolves negatively. In the early 19th century, some created The Natural History of Quadrupeds, written by Frederick Schoberl and Thomson Lancier, and read, wolves are such ferocious and useless animals that all other animals detest them. They even hate each other, and therefore scarcely ever live together, each one in its own separate whole. Perhaps of all other animals, wolves are the most hateful while living and the most useless when dead. A common theme in early fairy tales was wolves being dangerous. Many European and Russian literature references werewolves and tales about children being raised by wolves. Werewolves were feared much more than the real wolf because they had the supernatural powers, making them appear more dangerous. Stories like Little Red Riding Hood and the Three Little Pigs taught carefulness and work ethic. These stories did not intend to make the wolf seem like an evil animal, but the people interpreted them as evil. This view on wolves had such a negative impact that they were not considered worthy of scientific inquiry until the mid-20th century. When European colonists came to America, they brought their fear of wolves with them based on the old world myth and folklore. As wolves posed a threat to early settlements, they also became a metaphor for environmental challenges for the new North Americans. This negative view on wolves had such an impact that it ultimately led to their removal from most of North America and Canada. And at the same time, the native populations in North America were decreased by the settlers from Europe. After that, the settlers brought large amounts of sheep and cattle to roam the open ranges in Western America. And due to this, the wolves and other large predators began killing more livestock as they are now an easy prey. And as a result, this greatly increased the fear and hatred of wolves for the settlers, making them want to kill the wolves even more. Now, after knowing how humans came to dislike wolves, you may be wondering, how dangerous are wolves? Raise your hands if you would fear a wolf encounter. Okay, well, you shouldn't be afraid. Well, you should, but not that afraid. There's like two studies on human-wolf interactions, and both of them conclude that attacks from healthy wild wolves, they do happen, but they're very rare and unusual. Both the reports state that there hasn't been a wolf in the 20th century that killed someone. The first report documented wolf attacks around the world during the past 400 years. The authors reviewed records of human-wolf encounters from a variety of sources and conclude that historically, wolf attacks are very rare, and attacks in the 20th century were even more rare. They also reported on the four main causes of wolf attacks, including rabies, habituation, provocation, and modified habitats. The second one documented 80 cases of wolf-human interactions, both aggressive and non-aggressive, that happened in the last 60 years. 36 were in Alaska, 41 in Canada, and 3 in Minnesota. Of all the cases, none were fatal, and only 25 involved unprovoked aggression. Of those 25 cases, only 13 ended up in injury to humans. The other 55 cases mainly consisted of interactions where wolves were acting in self-defense. The findings of the report show that the majority of wolves do not pose a threat to human safety. The studies say that someone walking in wolf country has a higher chance of being killed by a dog, lightning, bee sting, or a car collision with a deer, rather than being killed by a wolf. Now I'd like to share the story of Takaya, as it shows how intelligent and adapted this species is, as well as an example of a local modern human relationship with a wolf. Takaya is a wolf who came to a small archipelago off of Victoria named Discovery Island. It is believed that he left his pack to find or form a new one. His journey in the media's eyes started in 2012 when he was reported by locals in Victoria, BC. In May 2012, there were a series of witnesses saying that they saw a wolf traverse across Victoria and then swim to Discovery Island, which is 1.5 kilometers away. Throughout Takaya's years on the island, he adapted to the environment and was able to feed and drink from what at first was seen as impossible. He obtained his water from seasonal pools. In the winter, he drank the pools of collected rainwater, but in the summer months, those pools dried up, so he solved this problem of survival by digging down where the ponds were to find moisture in dried up ponds. 9% of his diet was from hunting seals, and in fact his skills benefited the rest of the island. After he hunted a seal, he would bring it inland, bringing more nutrients to other animals that would not normally have access to these. The other 10% of his diet mainly consisted of geese eggs and pickleback fish. He also tried to make an otter, but this was very difficult for him as he was a lone wolf, and wolves are traditionally pack animals, so therefore they hunt as a pack as well. In late January of 2020, Takaya was seen in the backyard of a residence in Victoria. After being checked by BC conservation officers, it was determined that the wolf was Takaya. Takaya was then relocated to a coastal habitat on the west side of Vancouver Island. The conservation officers decided not to relocate Takaya back to Discovery Island because they thought that Takaya was likely looking for a new food resource. Unfortunately and sadly, on March 24th, 2020, Takaya was shot dead by a hunter 50 kilometers away from where he had been released in late January. Cheryl Alexander, who is the producer of a documentary on Takaya, made a statement saying that Takaya's death should be a wake-up call to hunters who kill for fun, saying that Takaya will leave a huge legacy. He was providing help with people because he was probably the biggest isolationist in the world. And when she was speaking of isolation, she was referring to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, which at the time had recently just made everyone go into quarantine. Besides wolves dying in this way for trophy hunting, there are little to no regulations on killing wolves. In Canada right now, there is a wolf call. A call is when a specific animal is selected to be slaughtered or killed to help the population of another animal or ecosystem. As an example, in Canada, the government put a call on wolves to help boost the declining and almost extinct caribou populations in northern BC and western Alberta. This wolf call has been active in BC since 2015. However, the only way that the call could help is to kill half of the wolf population in central BC. Critics believe that the wolf call is too extensive and that the main reason for the declining caribou population is their loss of habitat due to human expansion, meaning industry growth and an increase in human recreational areas, not due to the predation of wolves. Proponents of the call believe that if we want to see a long-term recovery for the caribou, we must continue with the wolf call and protect their habitats at the same time. Like I said, there's a call on wolves to help protect the caribou populations as their populations are low. Since we know that there are other actions humans can be doing to help save the caribou populations other than the wolf call, we must ask ourselves why the call in the first place. The government put the call on wolf into action because of the low caribou populations caused by the wolves getting into the caribou ranges and killing them. I should say some wolves, not all of them. This made the government put a call on wolves instead of looking into help until the wolves got there. Moreover, calling wolves is the cheapest option in raising the caribou populations, so that is partially why the government went ahead with this method. Currently, the only other thing that the government is doing, other than calling wolves, is putting caribou into maternal penning areas. These areas are giving the caribou a safe area that can't be reached by other predators, so they can repopulate to have higher numbers, enhancing their chances of survival. A few major things that the government could do to help the caribou is have less forestry, mining, and smaller recreational areas. If more planning was put into where our recreational areas were, it could greatly benefit the caribou. If the recreational areas were farther away from the caribou territory, this would also allow the caribou to live in peace and not be forced out by human activities such as snowmobiling. Another way we can improve the caribou population without calls is by making logging and mining industries in BC smaller. Logging and mining activities create roads in the mountains where caribou live. There's a study that tested wolf movement, and it stated that the wolves were influenced by linear features such as streams and rivers, and that wolves were influenced even more by roads and trails that humans make. We have already experienced the wolf cull in Yellowstone National Park. This cull occurred because of political pressure from livestock industries of the fear that the wolves were endangering the local livestock of the farmers. The effects of the wolf cull were clearly devastating to the whole ecosystem. It was only after the negative effect on the wolf cull that the wolves were brought back to correct the disastrous mistake of removing the wolves in the first place. If the cull in BC continues for too long, we could potentially see similar negative impacts as we did in Yellowstone. If there became a lack of wolves in the mountain ranges, this could result in an increased number of plant eaters, thus creating more competition for the herbivores, and therefore it means that it could be harmful to the caribou populations that rely on these plants for nourishment. This could also mean that the herbivores will eventually begin to die off due to rapid disease spread and inbreeding due to overpopulation. So what are the benefits of the wolf cull? Besides having less predation of the delicate caribou populations, wolves can be responsible for the deaths of livestock animals, and livestock are easy targets for wolves. Therefore, the wolf cull offers farmers better protection of their livestock, which ultimately results in an increased profit. This in turn means that the smaller towns that rely on farming ranchlands will benefit. So now what was going to happen on my spring break? Over my spring break, I had many interviews and a fieldwork experience planned in the Canadian Rockies in Golden, Jasper, and Canmore. But due to the COVID-19 pandemic, this all had to be cancelled. Instead, I was able to conduct virtual interviews with Carson Hewer and John E. Marriott to gain their different perspectives and insight on the wolves. My first interview was with Carson Hewer, who among other films made the documentary Being Caribou and was a past president of Y2Y. He is currently a biologist in Banff National Park with Parks Canada. My second interview was with John Marriott, who is a professional photographer and wildlife conservationist in Canmore, Alberta. When asked about his views on the wolf cull, Carson said that he believes that the cull works in the short term, but not in the long term. He believes that the government is just using the wolves as a scapegoat, putting a face to the problem so that they don't have to take the stronger actions needed in order to save the caribou populations. Carson feels that the best way to make the cull work is to pair it with reducing industrial activity, as the wolf cull is not doing enough to help raise the caribou. There would be a greater chance of long-term recovery increase if we were to continue with the wolf cull for a little bit longer, but to see long-term success in the caribou recovery, it needs to be combined with a reduction of industrial activity. My second interview with John Marriott focused on the belief that the government does not have an actual caribou plan, and that this is the key to increasing the caribou herds. Right now, the government is just making it look like they're doing stuff to help the caribou populations. But similar to what Carson said, they're using the wolves as a scapegoat when there's much more that they could be doing with the reduction of industries. To add to this caribou plan, he suggests some implementations besides only predator control. He believes actions like maternal penning, habitat restoration, as well as the potential option of letting herds of 25 to 52 fade out, are not trying to help them as much and closing down roads permanently that aren't being used. Both could have a positive impact on the for the caribou. Both my interviews with Carson and John echoed the same stance on the wolf cull. Overall, they think that the cull is excessive and that the government is avoiding the necessary tougher decisions in order to save the caribou populations. The only way to make the cull work is to pair with a reduction of industrial activities. Through these interesting and insightful discussions, it became clear that if the government put in place a stronger caribou conservation plan, then the cull could be a temporary contribution and not the sole solution to saving the caribou. A cull on the wolves is like putting a bandage over a wound that will never heal. Perhaps their combined message was to improve our human-wolf relationship, and that is the education and the importance for us to experience nature. For this project, I want to explore many different aspects of wolves, like how they behave and act as a keystone species, as well as how and why humans treat wolves the way they do. The biggest thing that I took away from this project is how interesting and important wolves are to ecosystems, other animals, and to humans. My final thoughts on wolf call is that the call is way too excessive and that it should only be limited to maybe 1 or 2 months at max. I have come to understand that the more informed people become and understand wolves, the better it is for all wilderness habitats. Knowing more about wolves would also bring awareness to what is really happening with the call and the true impacts that industry is having on the decreasing caribou numbers. What started as a spark that was ignited when I visited Northern Lights Wolf Sanctuary last summer has led to an appreciation and deeper understanding of the role that we all play in the world around us. Specifically, and perhaps more importantly, the role that I play. In conclusion, I leave us with 2 quotes from my interviews. When I asked John about why we should be saving the wolves from the call, he replied because wolves are sentient beings and therefore have value in our ecosystems. When I asked Carson about how we can improve our relationship with wolves, he replied, by spending time in nature. We live in a time with competing distractions, but it's only through being in nature that we can build connections and a deeper appreciation for not only wolves, but all ecosystems. Thank you for joining me on my final Masterworks journey. If you remember from the start how I was talking about the dog, as a happy note, I did get the dog because it wore my parents down. Thank you, Carrie, for guiding me through this year-long project. I never felt frustrated through this, and I think it was all because of your help and generosity of time. Thank you, Sophie, for your insights and expertise and research suggestions. Your knowledge streamlined the direction that I need to go. Thank you, Jen. Even though you've probably overseen hundreds of Masterworks projects, you never get bored and help us. Thank you, Carson here and John Marriott. I can't tell you how much I appreciate your insight on wolves with your amazing experiences in the field. The passion that you both exuded was evident, and your interviews have left an everlasting impact that will remain forever with me. Thank you to my family for helping me keep on track with Masterworks and forcing me to do stuff when I didn't want to do it. Thanks to my class for supporting me during this past year. And finally, thank you Northern Lights for igniting my passion for the love of wolves.
I just want to start off by saying, again, I'm so proud of you. It's been amazing to kind of be alongside you through this journey and see you grow as a scientific researcher and a writer. It's been a lot of development has happened along the way, and I think you started not really knowing exactly where you wanted to go with wolves, and I think you've just really discovered so much and have still so many questions left over to continue discovering, so that's excellent. I have a couple questions here from myself and from Sophie, who couldn't be here today. To start off, after all this research that you have done studying on wolves, how do you see yourself using this information in the future? Would you ever consider a career in something like conservation?
For using this information in the future, I would probably be more careful of what I do that have an impact on the environments, and just probably try and go out into nature more often. Don't get happy. And to your second question, I can see me having interest and job in conservationist stuff.
Okay, excellent. And again, what actions do you know of that are currently being taken to sort of fight the wolf call? And how optimistic are you that one day we might not have to use the wolf call? We could use other methods.
I am pretty hopeful that one day we won't have to use the wolf call. But right now, as I said, there's the maternal caribou stuff pending, and that's one of the things. But it's not really fighting the wolf call. But there are a bunch of organizations that are out there that are trying to fight the wolf call, and so yeah.
Okay, thank you. Last question: what do you think we can take away as the general public? What can we take away from the story of Takaya?
We could take away how smart and interesting wolves are, and have a deeper appreciation for them, and sort of what kind of stuff they can do, and how they are a pretty dominant species in the ecosystems.
This is an ethical question. Is it defendable that you can kill one animal to save another animal species?
I would say yes, but only depending on how like low like the one of the species is, and how many animals that you would have to kill from the other species. Because if it's like a lot, then I would say no. But also like, actually, yeah, that's my answer.
It's a tough question. Okay, questions from the floor. Miss Jan, go ahead.
Great presentation, Mr. Fayle. I was just wondering, you talked about the 3 different kinds of wolves, and these like they're different because they live in different parts of Canada. But you said that they have different adaptations, and I was just wondering what those different adaptations were.
Thank you, Mr. Fayle. There was such good teaching in there. I loved all your information about Keystone Species, and I think that story about Yellowstone is really relevant. I was heartbroken about Takaya. I didn't actually know the end of that story, and I feel terrible about that because it was there's a documentary, a Nature Things documentary about Takaya, right? It's absolutely beautiful, and people were learning so much, and I felt like there really was a pointed connection there for people to be able to connect with the wolf by seeing how smart he was and how special he was. So it's really sad for us, I think. But that's not my question. So my question is, when we were in Africa, I was learning about in Namibia they have a problem with hyenas, a lot like the wolves in Canada. They're a keystone species, but people fear them. Ranchers hate them. And it's very much like the Yellowstone story as well. And one of the strategies they have is they have a program where they've studied the behaviors of the hyenas and how they hunt the animals in the ranches, and they found certain ways that the hyenas are hunting. For example, at night, close to protection where they can hide till they get really close. Like if the livestock's all in their trees, they will hunt along the tree line and stuff like that. So what they've done is they actually are teaching the ranchers to change their behavior. So bring the animals in at night, keep them away from these dangerous areas. Do you think that's possible in Canada? Do you think that's something that we should look at?
Yeah, definitely. Because in my interview with Carson, he talked about someone, I forget his name, but like he has like a big property with like animals, and like they're like wolves and like other large predators on that. But like he just learned to like know like where they are and like avoid those areas. Because like if you have like a bunch of land, then like it's easy to avoid the areas with the predators that you don't want to kill, the stuff.
Mm-hmm. And I wonder, the other thing I really learned from your presentation was, and when we went to that thing about the Yellowstone Yukon, the fact that taking the wolves out is going to have such a devastating effect on the caribou, because the wolves will have access to other herbivores, the wolves won't have access to other herbivores, and the other herbivores are going to outcompete the caribou. So I guess it's another question of education. Do you think there's any way that what you know about simple solutions, there's any way to educate the government, the people, the ranchers, everybody?
I don't think that there's a simple way to educate the government, as they probably just focusing on what can get them the most amount of money. But for like farmers, then we probably could with like the hyenas and teaching like the farmers to like sort of trying to stay away from those areas, and just try and do that is like the best way that I could think of.